Good afternoon, everybody. I think we are ready to start the Architecture Day of Helsinki Design Week 2018. Welcome to everybody in the audience and especially our speakers who will have their turn in about 10 minutes. But to start the day, let me introduce myself. I am Reetta Heiskanen, the Interim Director of the Museum of Finnish Architecture, and I will be moderating the day today. But first person to come on stage is our host, Kimmo Knaapila, CEO of Graphic Concrete. So Kimmo, please have the stage and introduce all about Graphic Concrete.
Okay, good afternoon, and my name is Kimmo Knaapila, and I'm COO of the Graphic Concrete. And welcome to this Architectural Day and the theme Value of Balance, Balance of Values. And we organizing this together with the Helsinki Design Week, and this program is part of our 15 years anniversary. And I also want to thank the speakers of today to be here, and because I'm not so good in words, but we have a video ready here to 3 minutes explain what is Graphic Concrete. So on behalf of me, welcome to this seminar, and let's next see the video. Thank you.
Any pattern, any design, any image. Whatever your mind imagines, you can place on precast concrete and create a stunning, iconic facade. Graphic concrete is an innovation that revolutionizes the way graphics, patterns, and images are imparted on precast concrete surfaces. Available at precasters worldwide, Graphic Concrete uses a proprietary membrane technology for placing remarkably detailed aesthetic designs onto precast. Graphic Concrete adds a distinctive flair to precast concrete walls, cladding panels, spandrels, sound walls, and rain screens. Used successfully for more than a decade on hundreds of stunning projects worldwide, Graphic Concrete is the most effective way to bring your design ideas to life. It also has environmental and safety benefits. You can achieve beautiful textures and patterns without acid wash or silica dust exposure. Buildings and other structures require next to no maintenance to maintain their attractive style. Creating a graphic concrete treatment is simple. Start by choosing from dozens of patterns from the Graphic Concrete website, or provide us with your own image or graphic. Using our proprietary technology, your pattern or image will be imprinted on a special membrane. You will work with your local precaster and graphic concrete consultant to determine an optimal mixed design, including cement color and possible pigmentation, as well as aggregate type, color, and size. In the controlled environment of the precast facility, the precaster will fit the membrane into the mold and place reinforcements and lifters before pouring wet concrete. After the panel cures, it is stripped from the mold. The membrane is removed. Then the panel is power washed to reveal the final durable pattern. Once the panel dries, it's ready for erection. No sealers or coatings or additional treatments are necessary. And thanks to factory precasting, there's no time-consuming and intricate field work. Your local precaster will work closely with you during the entire process, from initial design and ordering to delivery, to ensure your graphic concrete exterior will stand the test of time. It's a modern, innovative, durable, and amazingly uncomplicated way for putting a distinctive finish on any structure. Graphic Concrete is ready to help you turn your design vision into concrete reality. For more information about Graphic Concrete and your market contact, visit graphicconcrete.com.
So thank you, Kimmo, and thank you also the technicians. Today we are going to talk about many phases of architecture, and our first speaker, Rasmus Kierkegaard, comes from Denmark. And he is going to approach us with the issues of interaction with the community and interactivity of buildings. So please, Rasmus, have the stage.
Thank you. Is this working? Yeah, it seems so. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm Rasmus Kierkegaard. I'm from Schmidt, Lassen Architects. I'm a partner in this office that's almost 30 years old and works all around the world. But today I have chosen to talk a little about a topic I called Responding to the Site. We have a discussion going on at the Architecture Week here in Helsinki about the balance of values in architecture. And seen from our perspective, a good Scandinavian tradition of form follows function is of course our basic ground we are standing on, but aesthetics plays a big role. The political message a big building can hold, of course, also is important. But there is another theme I want to address, and that's the responsibility towards the context, towards the site, the interaction with the society. Whenever we build somewhere, we also take something away. We remove existing structures or sightlines, views, open spaces, but we also remove embedded memories within the site, stories that has been told, and we have an obligation to replace that with something of equal or even more value. I will use this opportunity to show you 3 projects that demonstrate how Schmidt, Lassen and I is responding to the site. I would love to go into much more detail with the projects, but the time limit would only allow a brief introduction. And I will apologize now that I brought far too many slides, so it's going to be really fast. But I also do believe that the visual impression from images sometimes speaks more than my words. So let's go ahead. The first one is a new library in Aarhus, the second biggest city in Denmark, called Dock 1. It's part of a new development of the whole northern harbor side, which has been transformed from industry to city. If you look at in a broader picture, you see that the harbor is surrounded by woods on 2 sides, and the little eye shows the exact side of this building. This is where the city originally started. This is where the fishing boats landed, from where the river meets the sea, and it all starts. It's also a point where the city center that has been drawn a little back from the water comes out along the river and connects to especially the northern part of the city. And in the future, the southern part will be developed as well. So it's kind of a pivoting point from where the city will spread out to these new harbor developments. It's a site that has a very differentiated context, which is very important for the design. So it looks as much as to the horizon as into the city, to the old part as into the industrial new part. So there's no backside, there's no front of this side, there's no playing on the old or the new. We had to reinvent what was the importance. You see it here before the building was built, totally open at the down left corner. And our approach or our concept was not to do a house, not to do a building, but to do a space. Do a place, a space of knowledge, of learning, and cover that. So we got a covered market space for medias. And that should connect the city with the new water, with the horizon. And we did that by 3 big elements. The first one was a raised platform. We have a lot of traffic issues in this site. We have a railway, light railway, we have a lot of parking, we have a road going through. So we took the public floor 1 step up. The second is the library. That's one continuous movement that is with almost no walls. You don't divide the different functions within the library. And the third one is the roof. That is the covering, the expression of this covered market space, which is actually a floor height office space at the top. So this office of almost 10,000 square meters hovering up on top of our new media market. You see it here in the section, and you see how the stairs and the ramp slowly moves up in one continuous movement. At the dusk time, how it is expressing itself very open, how the ground floor is a traffic space of quite a different quality. How the tilting facades of the top makes the mirroring of the neighboring buildings and sites being part of the negotiation with the building, how it expresses also what's surrounding it. And as you see, this is the ground floor plan. It's built upon 9 cores set in almost a square, quite simple, but that allows for all this traffic to go on. The largest automatic parking space in Northern Europe. 1,000 cars go below ground with no people. Works perfectly. And how do you then attract people 6 meters up to this next level? That's kind of hard, everybody knows that the ground floor is always the most attractive, but we managed through these huge stairs that of course took inspiration from the Spanish stair in Rome, that you could actually use them for a purpose, to sit on, to stay on. There's a lot of crossfitters that actually work out on these stairs, and it did create a new space outside the building. And I'll flip through, but because this is a wonderland for kids, it goes 360 degrees around the building and allows underneath this hanging roof to wander around, to play, to have fun, and to see the building. The first floor has this boulevard around it, and is then this is the library floor starting here. As you see, a lot of the furnishing is put in a perpendicular way to the facade, so all the way you can see what's going on outside. So very little walls and a lot of views that goes towards the city. So that's also, as you see here, you have the views deep into the building, but also deep outside. We use the city as a wayfinding, so it's more the direction you're walking than a sign that says where you're going. And it actually works really well. And it of course has places of grandness and places of more small scale. And all floors are connected. So we're not only opening up in a horizontal way, but also in the vertical way, connecting to the top floors. Here you see the long view. You can see all the way through the building. And wherever you are, you can always look at least to 2 sides, many places 3 sides, and orientate yourself within the city. So, of course, we have a glass to control the climate around, but it does feel like you're not in a house. In the middle, there is the wooden box we need for the auditorium. And the media ramp, it's called, which is the heart of the building. This ramp connects the first floor with the second floor. That is where all the library actions take place. And it has become a place of so many activities and can be used for anything you can imagine. And the very success of this was that it was actually possible to do political TV debates up to the elections while the library is running. So this can happen all at the same time. The same way it would do if you hosted an event in a square in the city. So we are interacting with the city, we're giving something back, and we're not closing off in that regard. Just going one step up, then all of a sudden you see the perfect square of the building, but no one will experience that because the levels are shifting and the connections between the different floors, and especially the views towards the sea and the city make sure that even nobody would, if asked, say, I'm in a square building, they would never know. Nobody knows, but you can actually make architecture very simple but very powerful at the same time if you do it carefully. The attraction of the horizon is immense. At the first year, every day the furniture would move back into the right place, but now they have given up because everyone want to face the horizon. And of course, the top floor is actually an office space. It is half occupied by the municipality and half by a private lawyer firm and a couple of other small firms. And the interesting this is that they actually bought into the idea that a lot of their workplaces are looking into a public library through the big roof lights. So it was also for them accepting that they are part of a public function. The last public functions we almost have that are not commercialized, with no commercials, no buying. This is a democratic place for learning, and they wanted to be part of that, and they could accept looking into this. I must admit that they didn't buy the idea until the house was there. It was impossible to get anyone to rent the space before they could see the house. Nobody believed in it, but when it was there, it's been a huge success. And you see from the city side how this attracts in the night, but also you see that the angling of this building, especially of course the roof plate, kind of pivots your view around and takes up all the directions that were already on the side. So it doesn't have a backside. It has always a way of leading your view towards another direction and leading you towards the new developments, thereby interacting with the side. The next building I'm gonna show you is in quite a different scale. It's a small theater, and just to place it, this is Denmark, the 4 major cities, and after the financial crisis, there was a big part of the country that were left behind. That didn't really get it when it started to move again. It was called the rotten banana. It's not a very nice, pleasant thing, and people living there hated it. But we are right at the top at that banana, where it breaks off, and quite in the outskirts. Here, the first theater in more than 100 years was built as a decision to make culture part of renegotiating the city, the land. And this area is known for having a lot of small theater clubs. There's a lot of things going on, but they didn't have the good facilities. So by the support of a private foundation, Realdania, the municipality managed to put up an architectural competition. We were lucky enough to win and do this project. This is the site in the middle of the city. You all know these kind of small town places, a lot of small houses, quite cozy, quite nice on a certain scale. And when you look at it here, you also see that it is small dots put together, except of course a big shopping mall that came along in the 80s. And we are down here at the bottom, and we wanted to play along with that scale. We didn't want to break what was already going on, but we also knew a theater is larger than most of the buildings here. The theater is in an important place right next to the train and bus station, and at the same time a square and a connection to the shopping street is created. So it will also be a place a lot of people pass by. So the ambition was not only to do a theater, but to do a theater experience house, a place where people would go all time of day, even when there was no play on. This is the building and how it opens up towards the little square, and how on the other sides we started downscaling the building to play along with the villas and the housing in the area. We believe you can do truly modern architecture, be quite simple in your design expression, and still have a competent dialogue with the old architecture beside it. And as you see, I just put the city up in the corner, and the building is perceived in the same way, as a series of elements where you can pass by. There are small alleys within the building, there are squares, there are areas to stay and areas to move on. On the first floor, it's just a balcony floor, but it does have the offices of the theater put visible out in the front. Most theaters hide all that administration at the back. This is actually in the front, so you can also, as a person within the CDC who's working in the administrative part, and see how it consists of these 7 different areas and how it's used. also to move through, to stay, to have fun, and still have the scale, the small city scale that would allow for people gathering, like they would in a little square or in a cultural house within the city. Just to mention, the main hall is inspired by the Shakespeare Theatre in London. It's a theatre in the round. It's a very special way for the actors because they have audience all the way around them. But now we're able technically to do so much differently that we are actually able to transform that into a traditional theatre setting within a few hours. So the limitations that are within a lot of old theatres can now technically be overcome. And just closing out with this project, at night the colored glazed areas are lit from behind. We are trying to take a little of the glimmer and light from Broadway and bring it to the outskirts of Denmark, but do it in a subtle way that are not invading people's life and privacies, but still knowing that a theater should be fun, it should be party, it should be something larger than life when they do good shows, and you can actually do it without putting up big posters in a different way. And the third project is this one, the National Archives in Viborg. We are in the middle of Jutland, and there's today an old archive, that very nice old artistic building filled with people. This is how you imagine an archive. A lot of people, most of them almost as old as the things inside it, are studying what they can find. But now they wanted to move from the yellow dot in the city center to expand out into an industrial area. And that is mainly because an archive used to be a shrine of the state. It used to be where you kept the treasures. But today an archive is more like a safe. It's a climatized box that can make sure that everything within it is kept for the next generations. So basically we took up that challenge. We did a box, simply saying, well, let's make it as efficient as possible. Let's put it in a green area on the industrial side, but with plenty of grass and trees around it, and filled with compact shelving systems in 2 stories. So you can put an enormously amount of things into this. Mainly today it's papers from the municipalities that are kept in these archives. And it's not a public function anymore. Nobody comes there. And so basically in the front you have a little area for handling the stuff you get in, and then the back is filled with shelves. You see it here. Kind of just a box, a little boring. But we had the challenge of going from the old archive that actually had an intention, and both of them had very elaborate art integrated into this. It was the state and the municipality showing that they were able to do something that in this way. So we suggested that this box could also be artistic in some way. There's always a little budget in Denmark. In most countries, there's set a little side for public buildings for art. And we had the choice of buying a sculpture, putting it in front, or painting and putting it inside. But in front, it's an industrial area, but nobody would see it. They pass through very fast. Or inside would be only the 3 or 4 people working there. So we choose another direction, saying how can we use, with a very limited budget, make this building an art piece. And we were fortunate to meet this lovely elderly lady, the artist Grete Sørensen, who's actually a weaver but works with digital weaving. So she understood the industrial process of precast concrete elements and of graphic concrete. And together with her, we came out with this suggestion that kind of symbolizes that archive in most of our minds are shelves, are books, and we wanted that to be a simple story. Very naive, but it also has to be told in 2 minutes, and it has to fit the budget and the industrial way of working. So by just using a scale of pixels, we were able to come up with the pattern that could be used and reused in different ways to make variations within the module of the building. And you see it here constructed and how it works. When you look closely, you of course see the pixelation, but most people would see it from the distance, having this kind of view. So all of a sudden we have a modern way of expressing an archive. And we could even make the few windows and the doors into this module of the decoration, showing, like most people would see it in this angle, driving by very fast, but being very impressed or being at least aware that there's something special going on here. It might be a box, it might be closed for the public, but it is still an archive, it's still something for our future generations, and this way we were able to show them that this is something extra. So we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rasmus. We will all have a chance to pose questions later on this afternoon. After all the speakers, we will have a panel discussion and a little bit of interaction with the audience. But in terms of architectural theory, let us move from small and medium to large and extra large. I would like to welcome on stage Professor Jarmo Suominen, who is going to talk about city as a service and maybe show us some future directions.
Thank you. For sure I'm going to show some future directions. Not maybe. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm a professor in Aalto and also working in Tongji University and MIT in something called service architecture. My background is what I now call product architecture. I start to create products, big products, like buildings. But in terms of service, the value is not anymore in the building, it's in the use. And I'm going to show you examples of how to think about new strategies, new concepts of using buildings, and new innovations in use, not in buildings as such. So I used my first line is from Victor Hugo, from the book Les Miserables, "This will kill that." And he was saying first that the book will kill cathedral. And if you think about that, before we have books printing, all the stories were in the walls. They were in the walls of cathedral, in the same way like in archive you present. That the buildings will tell the stories. The books will take that privilege away. And I will go even further. The code will kill the building. So because of the digital age, we are using the buildings in totally different ways. We are using our resources in totally new ways. We could access knowledge. We could access things that wasn't possible before. So, and that's actually part of the idea of my talk, to think about accessibility of resources. So I'm talking about resolution of the city. Not anymore big areas or even big buildings, but fragments of our experiences. And then I show some references to ground it, to make it more kind of understandable maybe. And then maybe some reactions, the future goals, what this might mean. And like I was saying, what that does mean that code will kill the building. I've been working in MIT almost 20 years in Boston. And we have developed lots of tools for analyzing existing environment. Not CAD tools, not planning tools, but think about what are the actions in cities, what are the different activities, the using models, using projections and simulations, or what are the accessibilities, how could we think about mobility? And these are interactive models that we change something and you see the consequence immediately. And this approach somehow leads me through my PhD research to think about these new approaches, new ways of thinking about cities. I was having this type of talk in the city of Paris 1 year ago, and the vice mayor was asking me, how do I see the city of Paris after 100 years? I was saying pretty much the same. It's not the innovation of the buildings I see, but the innovation how we use the city of Paris. So this is one of the examples, this is from Barcelona, from Madrid, but with simulation we can think about, we place new functions, we place new things, we could actually see the consequences. And this is just one tool, it's an opportunity, but this enables us to really think about activity scale. More personal scale than just a building scale. So I was mentioning that the resolution, instead of building, I think about things like cafeteria or this meeting room or my work desk or something like that. And in order to think about that in maybe more scientific way, I will present this framework, then I go away of this, I promise, but this is a little bit theoretical. But I think about the focus of the design, internal or external, efficiency or effectiveness. And architects were trained to be good in internal efficiency. We create hospitals, we create museums, we create schools that are very efficient internally. That's the goal. But what does it mean to focus on external effectiveness? How could we actually create value together with the community, with the neighborhood? And that's part of the service logic. It's instead of thinking about value in the product, its value is co-created because the service is immaterial. And another aspect is what I call the structure. Based on the control, static, I own, I control, or is it flexible, I use? And you can think about modern ways to use resources like city bikes or Airbnb in the consumer side that enables us to use digital technologies in new ways. And once I put this together, I have this, there's a pointer here. I have this kind of 4 different typologies. So this one, which is based on control and internal efficiency, that's the old building, like this one, where we are right now. It has been designed for some purpose, and it doesn't change so much. It's just how it is. And then, still focusing on internal efficiency, we have this building, which is flexible internally. I move walls, I change kind of functions. But still, the focus is that efficiency. Then if I think about effectiveness, I could think about new schools that I invite external people to use my resources. But what I think is the future of the architecture, or part of that, not the whole thing, of course, is that instead of inviting people to use my resources, which I control, I use other resources. I don't build anymore, never again, these big kind of things, but I use more, I build more efficient hubs, whatever you say, and use more of the resources of the environment. So just an example, maybe very quickly. So the standalone old offices that are very static, based on control. Then we have kind of multifunction offices that are internally flexible, different type of moving walls or whatever. Then we have these co-working offices that are for external people. We invite others to come that. And that's already a step to the service side, because they are operated as a service provider, not as a janitor or kind of facility manager. And then the last part is to think about the resources, think about the environment, what is there. In Helsinki today, there's 1 million square meters empty office space, 1 million. So we could not ever solve this by building new square meters. So what we are lacking is not the space, we are lacking the accessibility. So in terms of kind of a network structure, instead of building these standalone clusters, my presentation and my thinking about future of architecture is more open networks, which actually, by the way, gives prosperity to the neighborhood because we are using other resources, not only the resources that I own. So the references, examples of that. What is the place called school? In this case, high school. We know learning happens all around us. Only one small fragment of the learning happens actually in the school, in home with our friends, wherever. Why do we still build these big, huge schools? Architecturally beautiful, but functionally they don't support learning as such. So the school as a product, it could be any school, beautiful or not, but what I'm saying that it collects all the resources inside. It creates an institution, or I could say prison. We lock kids in and they stay in once we deliver the teaching. So school as a service then is a network of resources. I only build and own this hub, which I kind of developed part of myself. And I think about what is in the environment. How could I benefit what is already there? My example comes from Otaniemi. We started the first school there. There's 28 restaurants in Otaniemi. Should we build some more? Or could you think that there's actually enough food serving there already? So we started the project 4 years ago by looking at the resources. What are there in the environment? What should we own? What should we actually build or control? And should the school that moves into campus, should it build a chemistry lab or gyms or things that already exist there and are professionally kind of maintained? So, and my examples are nothing, they are not examples of architecture as such, but concepts. So this Saunalahti school, great piece of architecture, but if you understand my point, so it's a kind of traditional concept that collects all the resources inside. And what we propose is that this, what I call school as a service, that we don't build a new school, but think about what are the best resources for the learning, and use service provider, service network, to actually connect these dots together. So the school acts like an organism that benefits from the resources outside. And also pedagogically, I mean, I'm a university teacher, so I don't have any pedagogical education. The high school teachers has lots of them. So there's lots of ways to benefit that putting these things together. So again, this is the same idea that we only build what we need and we use the resources of the environment. So more practical example, the first school that we built was Haukilahden Lukio, the high school of Haukilahti. And it uses, you see the resources that it uses in the Otaniemi campus. When I present the concept first, the city council of the city of Espoo was saying, no way, we need to have our schools built. But in the same time, they didn't have money. Most of the schools are kind of, there's the indoor climate problems. They need to be renovated. Cities need to put a huge amount of money for renovation. So they didn't have the money that they need to have. And second of all, they didn't have the resources that they need to have. So finally, the mayor accepted, okay, let's try this. Let's connect the real estate department, the pedagogical department together and think about this new concept. And we think about the use of the campus, the use of the resources. And the school moves from this building. You see that, or it was being built to school. In my terms, it was control, focus on internal efficiency, and it moves to this building, which is much smaller. 500 students move from this to that. And the reason why it's suitable for them, because they didn't need this or that, they all exist in the neighborhood. They don't need to build the new gym or new chemistry lab or new restaurant or new music class, because there are lots of resources already there. But until this very point, the city of Espoo, like many cities, most of the cities in the world, they still build these institutions that contains everything. And because of the connections, for example, this Haukilahti High School could have 14 different Chinese classes to be offered for the students. So it's not only a question of sharing the spaces, but sharing the resources, education. And also, you might wonder what the kids like about that. So the dark green is the new school, and the old light green is the school they moved from. So every single parameter is more positive. The impact, the answer I get from the school kids is that they don't feel any more prison inside some institution. They finally are part of the society, and they are more motivated to learn because they know how to use the learning. Economically, you see the dark color is the old model, this is the new model. basically in every single parameter, this is much more efficient. It's cheaper, it's the maintain, it's more flexible, it's more adaptive. Also, the amount of students applying in was increased. That's kind of word of mouth. So they think that that's a good concept, almost 180%. And it has won like 6 innovation prizes. I'm not bragging about this, but when I was more practicing traditional architecture, I was looking at architectural prizes, architectural awards, how to design building. But this is a kind of a new area. This is not anymore designing a building as such, but designing a strategy for the education. And the last award was the most intelligent community for the city of Espoo because of this. And previous cities were Melbourne, Eindhoven, Montreal, very prestigious cities that has been achieving the same award. And as I mentioned, so we also used the Pohjois-Tapila school, another school there. Now we are building the third school. But not only that, so we built the same school, same concept in Shanghai, where I work. In Bund, which is the most expensive area in Shanghai, which means that it's one of the most expensive areas in the world. So they don't have the site or the money to build a big school. So we create the same concept, and the school is there using the resources of the environment. There's a hotel, Peninsula Hotel there, 5-star hotel, and the Michelin kind of awarded cook will offer cooking classes for the kids, and etc. So there's a rock band art museum which is curating the art classes there. And it's kind of funny. Well, it's more than funny, it's great. But I was thinking that maybe I could not do this in a different culture, but it seems that at least in China it was possible. And the name is Tongji Huangpu High School, or School of Design and Innovation. We have pedagogical innovation to think about innovation strategies there. And very quickly, the same thing applies to many areas, like business park as a product. You see this thing, it's same idea, it collects the resources inside. Business park as a service, this is a project I'm doing in Montreal, in Canada, with the Banco Desjardins. They have 1,400 locations all over the Quebec. And we were proposing that why don't you, because banks don't need the space, they only need 20% of the space. Why don't you use the space to let people use that as workspace? You use the same space and create a network of co-working places and create a network of 1,400 co-working locations. So with the service innovation, I create a business park all around the place of Quebec rather than in one location nearby. And this is part of the idea why I was saying the resolution of the city planning is, at least from this point of view, much higher. So we focus much smaller components than before. So this is just one example that these serviced co-working locations, the amount of them, this kind of old statistic, but I just wanted to show you, it has every single year doubled in USA. And it means that you don't own, you just use, and it's kind of based on service then. And then the reactions, last part. So how many minutes I got? Okay, yeah. I'm just used to talk to you long, usually. Sorry. So what that might mean for the architects, for the designers, for the city planners. Again, so the old model, you build something, the risk is very high because you need to predict a lot. You need to know how the cities are going to evolve. The flexibility is relatively low. It's only internally flexible. And the usage, sometimes it might be high, sometimes low, but it's basic because it's one function or a couple of functions, the usage might be still low. But in this network model, the risk is, I could say, lower because it's more adaptive. If I need more resources, I could get them from the network. The flexibility is higher because it's a network I'm managing, not one building. And the usage of the city will be much higher. So traditional model of the city, once cities go bigger, they expand. More and more empty spaces around city. In this model, we densify cities. We use more and more what we have there already. Sorry, and in that way, I kind of claim that this is a more sustainable way, more sustainable approach for the future than just building green buildings or buildings that we assume are better. So what is this, from the planning point of view, what that might mean? So here are some network structures again. So this is very traditional hierarchy. You have the entrance to lobby, corridor, another lobby, corridor, and somewhere there is a place that you create value. In comparison to this, that you actually, everything's connected to each other. So the illustration, and for my research, I've analyzed 20 buildings in MIT campus. And MIT because, well, I work there, but also because it's one of the best universities in the world, so I'm thinking that buildings play some role. And this is a very awarded building for the brain. It's Brain Institute, and the structure where I analyze it, I think it's, I have a shortcut, but I think it's designed by Rafael Moneo. You see the network structure is that it has a big lobby, and then these different clusters that actually people work in the clusters. And as a consequence of that, you see the lobby, it's very beautiful, but each of these halls lead to another corridor and to another lobby. And basically you don't see anybody there, never. People just disappear in the building. And then I compare this to the building I work, in the media lab, in the campus, and with the same parameters I was using in the Brain Science Center, it looks like this. So you see everything's connected to each other. And from the inside, it looks like this. All the research units have the open wall, and it's pretty much like a commercial mall. You go in, you see what is there. And I think for the institutions, in the building scale, this should be the case. You should perceive more what is happening there. And the traditional kind of hierarchical idea is based on the idea what I was saying, internal efficiency and control. If you want to think effectiveness, if you want to invite others in your buildings. And in this case, this is a business tool for MIT because it's a private university and the money comes from sponsors. So if the sponsors are coming to the building, they don't see what is happening, they are not so willing to pay the money. So this is part of the building design that I think that we need to think about this in the city scale, building scale, and the spatial scale as well. And then, if we think about the role that it's not anymore kind of internal people that we are designing for. It's not our staff, it's the whole community. And the community, they don't care about our values, they care about what they perceive. They come to building, and if they like it, they like it, or if they don't, they don't. And in order to analyze that, I'm using this framework of think about different values, perceived value. Symbolic value, emotional value, operational value, economical value, and technical value. Each building has that. And as a way to illustrate, I start from the emotional value, what it might mean. Sorry, this one. This is the most innovative building in the world. I don't see any other buildings having received 9 Nobel Prizes. Well, it's not the building that received the prizes, but the people work inside that. Radar has been invented there, lots of new innovations. And there's absolute no reason architecturally that this is good. I mean, it was made out of asbestos, it was dangerous, it was ugly, but people love it. And they love it because they didn't need to ask anybody's permission to change it. If they wanted to tear down the wall, they just did it. And so the emotional bondage was so strong that they want to share the building with other researchers, other people there. And it was an invitation to the scientists in MIT to come use this building. But as I mentioned, it was dangerous. It was forced to be demolished. And it was replaced by this Frank Gehry's building, which was a great piece of architecture. And that's kind of dirty joke to say no Nobel Prize winners. But this is more like a symbol of innovation. Like the previous building was a platform for environment for innovation. And I still, even though I'm showing these pictures, I still have no negative feelings about these examples. But from this point of view, what I'm telling to you, they have different kind of, I have different thinking. So, but this building was replaced with the most expensive building in the MIT history to show the value of this heritage. Then the operational value, how do things work? How well I could do my thing, how well I could create value with my stakeholders, my customers, my community. That's another aspect that architects need to think about. And especially if you think about this new service-oriented approach, the stakeholder group is external people. It's not anymore enough to create the structure for the internal use. And hospitals are good examples of that. Doctors dominate hospital design. And then at the same time we are thinking that we need to take care, we need to take responsibility of our own health. But every time we go to any healthcare building, we are patients. We are dominated by the kind of the paradigm of that. Then economical value, it might be economical efficiency, accessibility, even some grandiose spaces. And I personally, I don't see the reason why we have, or maybe not in Finland, but especially in Tongji and Shanghai, there's millions and millions square meters of grandiose lobbies showing the power of the institutions and the money. And the last part is technical value. So how good the building is technically. And there's a reason I was showing you these in this order, because usually we start from technical value. We think about how it works technically and what is the economical value, and then add the operational value. But if we could think about what matters to people in emotional way, what is my identity? How could I see myself in a way that we create value together, not anymore alone? The design paradigm might be a little bit different. So this is the last sequence. To think about my example, school as a service, I think about workplace as a service, the hospital as a service. We can think about different things. And then the city as a service, it's not anymore one building. It's a different networks, amoebas, using different buildings. We still need to have buildings. I'm not saying that we don't need architects. We need, of course, we need design, we need renovation, we need new things. But we should not lock people and institutions inside these buildings. And one important thing I mentioned, but I like to emphasize that again, that this approach creates prosperity to the environment. We buy, we use more of what we have already, rather than creating concentrations of what we own and control. And as I mentioned, so this could be applied to many different approaches, but we are lacking something, and just a couple of slides. We are lacking platforms for that. You know Uber, you know Airbnb, they are platforms for customer side. If I need a taxi, I could call Uber, and if I don't have a taxi, no big deal. I call Uber, I call the next one. But if I change a school, like I was saying to you, they need to serve food in every single day. They need to serve the gym every single day. So the time span is much longer. So we need to think about the institutional kind of platform economy in different ways. And this is part of my startup I developed with my colleagues in Shanghai and MIT to think about this municipality or institutional demand and kind of existing supply. So the idea that cities could use this platform, for example, I'm working with the city of Espoo, that the demand is the school calendar, for example. So what we need, and instead of building the new resources, we could think about what is available and how to use it, and build only what we need. And it's, again, I'm coming back to the idea of resolution and the small scale thing, that it matters how we support and inject new livability in the environment in that way. And in this way, we could actually measure the network effect. It's easy to measure the ecological impact of the building, but how to measure the ecological impact of the network? And in this, what I'm kind of saying is that because we don't have these institutional platforms, this thing doesn't exist. With these projects, I have worked with the event arena as a service, even though people laugh at me that could everybody be a service, everything, yes, I say yes. I work with the hospital as a service, elderly care with the service as a service. And every single time the biggest problem is here. In the mindset of the cities, in the mindset of my colleagues as well, in the mindset of the political decision makers, that they don't see the opportunity of using the resources, because the whole procurement approach is that we collect the money, we do the bidding, and build the solution. And even though I maybe sound a little bit black and white, that's not my point. So I think that this is going to be part of the future, do we like it or not? And the reason I'm saying that, even the high school example, In Espoo there's 10, I think Helsinki 15, Vantaa almost 10 as well, 7 high schools that need to be renovated. In Shanghai there are 1,400, in USA 200,000, even just one high school thing that need to be developed further on. So even this one niche could change the way we think about cities. And school is a good way because schools are everywhere. They are just modular thing, and the biggest school and smallest school are not so different from each other. So we could think about different impacts of that. And then what is the outcome of that? So this is the diagram of my colleague in MIT, Erik van Hippel, about user innovation. And the idea is not achieving great radical innovation, but continuous optimization. And when I was a more practicing architect, I was thinking each of my building, each of my design need to be innovation. Now, I still love innovation, but I think if we could create a strategy that continuously optimizes itself, it's much more sustainable. But it requires different approach. And the reason I mentioned this approach for service, in order to function, this network needs to have operator, service operator, not facility manager, not janitor, or not building operator, but service operator, who manage the networks. And so this is my last slide. So I think the future in this way would be more adaptive. We create solutions that adapt for the future needs. It's more effective for the cities. We create solutions that actually, basically everybody benefits. And it's more accessible. We focus on accessibilities rather than entities or institutions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jarmo. Jarmo will also join us for the panel discussion after the second set of talkers, so you will all have a chance to pose questions later on. But now, thanks to our hosts, Graphic Concrete and Ainoa Winery, we can all experience a seminar as a service. So there is actually some wine tasting in the lobby, and we will have a 20-minute break. 2:30, the set will continue. Yes, of course.
Because I always turn my head otherwise.
Yes, well, if I hand you the mic when you come on stage, is that all right? Yeah, yeah. I also prefer it because then you can like.
Yeah, then I keep it on the same space.
Yeah, yeah. But Bas, give you flowers first, so we take care of the ceremony before your speech. Yes, it's an honorary theme, and so we just take a couple of minutes, you know, get the applause, and then you have time to settle down. All right. Yeah. Yeah. laittanut sit mulle sen väärän värin, mun pitää sanoa Basille vielä. Joo. Paneelikeskustelun alussa vai tuossa? Alussa. Siinä lopussa kun kiitetään siihen samaan kiitoksiin. Siis silloin kun toi Graphic Concrete Ltd. Kyllä se kannattaisi olla erikseen. Mä sinne kuka teemme? Ennen sitä. Joo, mun mielestä olisi kaikkein paras, koska silloin me myös niinku rajataan tää tavallaan, että se on se alusta.
So where's the foundation? The architecture foundation. It's old museum. Is it?
Yes, the museum is a couple of blocks south from here.
Just Giles, were you informed by Vera that there's the journalist who would like to interview you?
Yes, she said that.
Yes. So we have a small room.
Yes, she said after we have a talk.
Yes.
You can't hear much. Sanotaan kaikille, että jatketaan ohjelmaa. All right, everybody, please have a seat in the hall. We are ready to continue the program. And our next speaker, Mr. Giles Robinson, comes from UK, and he's going to continue the talks with the theme of collaboration. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. You can hear that okay? Good. Got the PowerPoint up. Well, firstly, I'd like to thank Graphic Concrete for inviting me here today to talk about a project. My name, I'm Giles Robinson, and I'm from Foster & Partners. We are a large, 1,500-person strong, multidisciplinary architecture and engineering firm. We work on projects all around the globe, and we work from the scale of large bridges and infrastructure projects down to individual products and door handles. So we really see the kind of the complete range and scope of projects. I'm here today to talk about Fortaleza Hall and Commons, which is for us a very modest project. But in fact, it was indeed a challenging one, not least for the context in which we were working, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I think also really to respond to the story that I'll tell about the building and its genesis. And that genesis really was this particular gentleman, which is Herbert Johnson. He's the third generation owner of SC Johnson, a large Midwest manufacturing company. Nothing very exciting. It was cleaning products where they started, but they became very famous for Johnson wax, which was used extensively for floor cleaning throughout the US and indeed across the world. And Herbert Johnson, something of a pioneer, he understood that the success of his company would be really based upon understanding the raw products that he used for the wax, and that was the oil from a canuba tree that grew in Brazil. And he understood very early on in his career as the CEO of the company that ensuring the sustainability of that source was critical. So in the spirit of the age, he decided to take a journey from Racine, Wisconsin, where they were based, all the way down across America, through the Caribbean, down to Fortaleza Hall. That was in 1935. And principally to understand and learn more about this particular tree and its wax. Importantly, to look at building community facilities in the forest to ensure that the people who are harvesting and growing the canuba palms were well looked after and maintained. And on that journey, there was a series of photographic images taken, and indeed there were some etchings produced of the canuba rainforests, which were very, very distinctive, and they did really give a clue to a particular element of the project that I'm here to talk about today. And that canuba, the canuba trees, very distinctive leaf and tree form, and very evocative, really, of the experience that we were trying to create in our building that I'll be talking about shortly. Herbert Johnson, he was a pioneer in terms of understanding his business, and he was a pioneer of architecture and a patron of architecture. And you'll all be familiar with, I hope, this complex of buildings, the SC Johnson headquarters in Racine. On the right-hand side, the great workroom built between 1936 and 39, and later post-war, 44 to 49, the research tower. And those two projects were built very much with Herbert Johnson at the helm of the company, and he employed arguably America's greatest architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, to develop the designs. And Frank Lloyd Wright was a true pioneer in his day, and I always very much enjoy this photograph. This is Frank Lloyd Wright with Herbert Johnson, the building inspectors, where he was demonstrating that his design was capable of taking not only the code requirements, which is 12 tons on top of the column, but he added an extra 38 tons to show just how clever and good his design was. And it was at that point the base of the famous column collapsed. But that building was an important component in the project. I think probably one of his seminal buildings, and probably one of the seminal buildings of the 20th century. Very close to his death, Herbert Johnson suggested to his son that he should make the same journey that he had made, and he should go down to Fortaleza to look at the facilities that he had built there, and to understand more about the community and the tree. And Sam took him up on that offer, and he initially went and tried to locate the Sikorsky S-38 seaplane, which there was only 200 made. The one that his father had flown to Fortaleza had been lost. The others had all been decommissioned. And rather remarkably, during the design phase of the project in 2007, they did actually uncover off the coast of Indonesia the wreckage of the original Kanuba seaplane. And we did at one point look at trying to bring that back to the surface and introduce it into the project, but that was a step too far, certainly for this for the project I'm talking about today. But undeterred, Sam Johnson elected to go back, and he uncovered the original archive drawings for the seaplane in question. And he then went about from 1995 to 1998, creating an exact facsimile and replica of the plane, which is shown in the photograph here. The Kanuba 2, effectively, together with original wicker seats in the cockpit. And Sam Johnson, together with Fisk and Kurt, his two sons, made that journey, and it was beautifully captured in a film made, Kanuba Memories of My Son, and there's a little bit of footage here just to look at. And the film is worth watching. I mean, it's a fabulous bit of cinematography, going from the reconstruction of the plane, flying through the Midwest, down through the clouds, and ultimately terminating the journey in Fortaleza. And then Sam unfortunately died in 2004, and his son Fisk Johnson took over the reins of the company, and he decided very early on that he wanted to commemorate the life of his father, Sam, and decided to create a project where he could locate the Sikorsky seaplane in perpetuity. It had become quite a complicated aircraft to keep running, and he felt that that would be a legacy for his father. And so in 2006, he elected to run an international design competition, and we were invited to that, and after the normal tussles of designs and interviews, we were awarded the commission in 2006. And from the outset, and this is Norman and I on the first site visit, trying to establish where we might site a building in the context of Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings. It was certainly going to be challenging and quite daunting, not only dealing with the legacy, the family legacy of the Kanuba aircraft, but also the architectural legacy that we found at Racine. And I think quite interestingly, very early on, this is Norman's initial concept sketch for the project. We were very taken by the fact, and I'm sure those of you who have been to the campus will know, that Frank Lloyd Wright had designed both the great workroom and all the laboratories, so there was no external aspect. So you can't see out of the buildings, they're completely internalised. You're probably familiar with the glass tubing, which allows light in, but you can't see through it. So I think the client, and certainly it was almost a direct request, that as we developed the project for the aircraft, as the building should be highly visible. He wanted the staff to see in and out, very importantly out. And that was very much the kind of the key should we say, design move as we took the project forward. And you can see there the sketch with the aircraft just floating in a conceptual glass box. The design developed as they do, and we looked at a range of different solutions for the structure, how it could be integrated into the campus, and as part of the project was an ongoing master plan for how one deals with all of the existing buildings. And very importantly, collaboration. This is our team internally in London. We're very fortunate to work with Epstein from Chicago, our local architect, who were invaluable in taking forward the project with us, together with Bureau Happold, the engineering firm from London, and also supported from the US. And I think from our very early ideas for the project, and this is a model from the competition, we were very keen to develop a design that gave the aircraft a kind of a sense of freedom, of flight. And I think very importantly, the idea that we would introduce those very distinctive carnauba trees into the design. We didn't know how we were going to do it, but we felt that was important in terms of the storytelling for the project. Another kind of interesting point about the campus that we found out is that all of the buildings are kind of disparate and set on a fairly large, substantial campus, but they're all linked with a series of subterranean tunnels. And those tunnels are critical in terms of the movement of the staff, 1,500 on site, around the property. So it was quite apparent from an early stage that it would be necessary to have a lower undercroft, and this is looking down. This is the point where we discovered the old Sikorsky plane, and the idea of putting that kind of below a raised floor, which we didn't realise in the end. But I think what's important is that we saw the opportunity to create a really kind of monumental space below the aircraft. And that would present to us some kind of unique opportunities to introduce thematic elements into the project. We were then, I think, very fortunate to be able to work with Ralph Applebaum from New York and his team, with Tim Ventimiglia on the left there, the principal, and Fabio. And we worked with them quite intensely for about 12 months on the project to develop various aspects of the design, and in particular the mural in the base of the project. Ralph Applebaum had introduced us to Graphic Concrete. It was a process that we hadn't used on our projects before. And they were very quick to realise the potential of that, particularly at this lower area where we had these large monumental concrete panels. And so we began to develop an idea and a concept for introducing a large mural, about 800 square metres, formed of 15 substantial precast panels measuring 5.5 metres by 4 metres, and introducing those into the base of the hall, and then looking at the potential to lower the aircraft so it immerses itself in that context. And that was the design that we find it's taken from an original photograph taken from the 1935 journey to Fortaleza. We then had, I think, the very interesting aspect of graphic concrete and developing it as a design solution for the project is to look at how one realises imagery through the pixelation. And we looked initially at the idea of maybe using the carnauba leaf as a pixel to generate the image, and that was something that we took quite a long way. We also then looked at simpler solutions to develop the imagery. And I think what's very important is that when you're doing this, having looking at the graphic density of what you're producing and how that, and you'll see this in a moment, how that works with the fabrication process, I think is critically important to the success of the project. And then we finally came up with a third solution, which was slightly more relaxed from the previous one, which I think gave some definition, but it was also it had a more filigree quality to it. And I think what I really enjoyed, and I think the team really enjoyed about graphic concrete, is that, and in particular in this project, because we're using it, it's only used internally, is that you can get very, very close to it, and you see there's a real delicacy of it, when you're up close, and then you move away from it, and you begin to understand and perceive the imagery of the photograph. So I think it works on a range of different scales, and I think that was the most enjoyable part, really, as we developed the design, just being able to experience it in these different distances where it took on a different quality. So we then completed the detailed design stage, and you can see here on the far left the photograph with the final design located just on the nib. We did look at introducing graphic concrete elsewhere, but elected not to do so. And at that point, I think we were quietly confident we had kind of got a really kind of compelling solution. But then, of course, there is the reality of making it. And we were, again, I think, very fortunate. I think, all projects are about collaboration, and we were very lucky to find a precast concrete manufacturer in Germantown. It was about 30 miles north of Racine, who were very, very good at precast, very, very good at manufacturing curved panels, and also very patient and were prepared to go through a fairly extensive mock-up process. And I think what was interesting is we developed the solutions, and I think on the video you saw at the beginning, how much aggregate you're putting into the concrete, how the density of the graphic artwork determines the kind of the quality and the tonality of the final product. And there were many kind of hits and misses with this, and it was a process that took about 2.5 months to get right. But again, kind of fascinating to see. And this is one of the misses. This is when you go, when you're too subtle with it, and you lose the imagery altogether. And we felt it was important to go through this process to make sure that we had that right quality to the final image. And that is what we finally selected after a couple of months of developing the graphic technique and the processes, and obviously working directly with the manufacturer in the workshops with the acetates and the molds. And then this is the final mock-up panel, which was produced prior to construction. And you can see the kind of the heroic scale of it, which I think we felt was very enjoyable. It was at kind of this point that everyone was getting very, very concerned about the risk of introducing an element of this size into the project. How do we do it? And then again, a kind of a key moment when the client was told we need to break this panel into 3 to get it into the building, and everyone was pulling their hair out, thinking all of this work done is going to be, kind of destroyed by introducing horizontal joints. And again, as a point of collaboration, and I suppose obvious because precast concrete is normally used as an external application. The contractor said, well, why don't we install it before we build the rest of the building? Which is, I suppose, with the benefit of hindsight, is kind of blindingly obvious. At the time, it wasn't. But they suggested a solution whereby we would do all of the installation of what is a finished piece of, quite fine, intricate work, and that would all be installed prior to the superstructure being constructed. And you can see it there. There was a lot of time and effort spent ensuring that these panels, which weighed over 8 tons, could be brought into site. And you can see the building. and this is the point where the 15th panel has been lifted into place. And we then, after that was completed, and there's some images there of it being installed and lowered into place, they could then build the superstructure. So all of the precast was fully protected, and then we dropped the roof and the steelwork and the glazing in and around it, obviously making sure that the final surface was very well protected. So the building was completed in 2010, and we had the opening party in the base of the space. 400 people were there at the opening. I think really a message I think that I want to put out is that these projects kind of work through collaboration. There's no any one master, I think, in this process. There are a lot of people helping, contributing to the design and to the construction. And to that end, I think companies like Graphic Concrete who assisted us all the way through the process to the stone contractor and the contractor who built the project, Gil Baines, I think really, really important. I think the final end results, I think I said at the beginning of the talk that we had used this reference from 1935, this etching as the kind of the quality we wanted to introduce into the base of the building. I think with that process and working through with the team, we managed to develop something that was very distinctive, but very much part of that original journey. And you can see that in the final two slides, the space at the bottom of the hall, and the final image, which is the idea of the plane in flight with the imagery of the Kanuba rainforests below. And I think that's what I have for you.
Thank you, Giles. He will also join the panel discussion on stage a little bit later on. But now we have one more speech to come up. Maybe I can ask Bas Smets to join me on stage, because this is also the moment when the Museum of Finnish Architecture has the honor to prize Bas Smets with the Eero Saarinen Honorary Prize. And Bas has been asked to come here and give a lecture to honor the prize. I actually had a chance to sit down with Erik Saarinen, son of Eero, a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him that how does it feel that our museum is going to honor the great international career of Eero Saarinen in this way. For the whole decade, starting in 2010, the museum has given the award. And Erik put a hand on his heart, literally, and he said that it has always been in their family, that they have respected the young talent, and it is really their family honor to give the prize and stage for young architects to show their work. And Bas is a landscaping architect, and he comes from Belgium. In his speech, a little bit later on, he's going to talk about the ambitiousness and new ambitions of landscape architecture. But before we ask you to address, I would like to invite the ambassador of Belgium, Mr. Carl Peters, on stage. Maybe we give the prize first and then...
Yes, so I'll give the prize first. Thank you. And then some beautiful flowers from... Which flowers? Fantastic. Thank you. Congratulations. As Ambassador of Belgium, I'm extremely proud today to present this award to my compatriot Bas Smets, because he put his landmarks everywhere. And he was also the architect of the Belgian memorial for the terrorist attacks on the 22nd of March 2016. So it was a very moving moment when I read in his biography that he was, let's say, the driving force behind this unique monument in the Forêt de Soignes, the forest in Brussels. So again, congratulations, many success in your future career. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much for this prize. I'm very honored. And I would like to speak about landscape. I will show you some projects, but I would also like to share you the philosophy we've developed in the office, where we try to think about what is the ambition of landscape, or what is landscape to start with. And is it okay? Voilà. And so we're doing this let's say, this parallel research in the office into the notion of landscape. And now it's interesting to know that landscape is a word that was used for the first time in the 16th century, not to speak about physical reality, but to speak about a new genre in painting. This new genre was invented within windows painted in typical scenes. This is Chancellor Rollin with the Virgin. And the painter, in a certain sense, cut out a piece of liberty within his assignment. The assignment was always very clear. There was 10 of 20 scenes that would come back, but they would kind of cut out some liberty to organize all the natural elements with a new technique, being the perspective that came from Italy. This is Jan van Eyck, and this piece is in the Louvre in Paris. And then 50 years later, there's Joachim Patinir, who actually inverts foreground and background. His assignment is the rest on the fly to Egypt, which he reduced to 5% of his painting, and he was more interested in developing the atmospheric perspective. He was more interested in painting landscapes that did not exist, but that were his kind of imaginary way of representing the world. Again, 50 years later, the same scene, the flight to Egypt, and this is Bruegel. And Bruegel, as you can see, is much more interested in playing with his colors and creating a kind of ideal view of the world. And again, the assignment reduced to the minimum of three figures. And I'm showing these because it's interesting to understand that landscape from its start was not speaking about physical reality, but really about a representation of an idea, a representation of an organization of a worldview. And it takes about 300 years before the word landscape is really used to speak about the physical reality. And even here, Turner, 300 years later, when he's painting London, he's more interested in the phenomenon of the mist than showing London as he sees it. So in a way, he's using landscape again to reveal something. And Oscar Wilde wrote a very important piece using this painting in the Decay of Lying. He says that it took Turner for Londoners to see the mist above the Thames. Of course, the mist had been there for many years. It's a natural phenomenon, but we needed somebody to show it to us. And he says art, he says life imitates art far more than art imitates life. And this idea by the famous philosopher Alain Roger was put into a theory where he says land is transformed into landscape through a cultural process. It needs a cultural process to become something identifiable. For example, we needed Van Gogh to see the colors of Arles. or we needed Cézanne to see the Mont Sainte-Hélène, and there's many examples of this, of course. We need maybe Caspar David Friedrich to see the romanticism of the ocean, and so in this theory, all these let's say all this land, all these existing situations becomes a landscape because of this artistic process. Now, I come from Belgium, which in a strange way you can see on a satellite photo of built space, because we have the densest occupation of the land. In a certain sense, directly linked to the fact that it's always been a very densely populated region with very fertile soil, but also because of the fact that we don't have any restriction from nature. We don't have the man-made landscape of Holland. We don't have the strong natural elements that you can find in France or in Germany. Once you pass the Ardennes, you're in a kind of flat land, le plat pays, as Jacques Brel would have it, where there's no restriction to any type of development, which means that in a way we lost the natural landscape, and we're in between this kind of natural of what's left of a natural landscape and what's a newly built landscape in the just like the polders were built in Holland. And in a funny way, these painters that I showed you, Patenir, Van Eyck, and Breugel, they all come from the Low Countries, and I think maybe because of a lack of a landscape, they're always making landscapes that they couldn't see where they were. Of course, they went to Italy, but they were in a kind of imaginary landscape. And in a similar way, when we work in Belgium, we try to imagine a landscape. We try to come up with new schemes to introduce landscape, to reinforce what's there, but especially to produce a new way of looking at the existing. And so many assignments in Belgium that then more and more become a kind of methodology that we reproduce in other situations. Today, we are 18 in my office based in Brussels, and we are working on about 50 projects in 12 countries. But I insist on this methodology that was really based on trying to imagine, conceive a landscape before implementing it. I will illustrate this with a number of projects. The first one in Brussels. In Brussels, which was developed along a main waterway, the Seine, which, as you can see on this aerial picture, is not visible anymore in the city. It has been canalized underneath the city center. It has been doubled by a canal linking Antwerp to Charleroi, and doubled again by a railroad system that follows the contour lines. And we like to make these maps that we make ourselves as a kind of cartography, trying to make a survey ourselves of what's there. And for example, we made this map showing all the green spaces of Brussels. And Brussels says it's the 4th greenest city in the world. Of course, if you count the Forêt de Soignes, it works. But if you look at the fragmented green spaces, it lacks a kind of systemic value. It's not linked to the Seine, because that's become a canal for industrial activities. And so, taking a step back and looking at the system of waterways of Belgium, we understood that it's a kind of capillary hydrography. We don't have the mountains, so it's not water coming from the glacier flowing to the ocean, but it's really a kind of local system that drains the rainwater towards the North Sea. And so looking at this, you understand that the tributary or the secondary waterways are almost as important as the main waterways. And when we projected the tributaries on the plan of the existing green, we understood that 80% was directly linked to the tributaries. So this made a new image that we made for the Brussels government, saying that instead of trying to bring back a river that's been lost, and that's very hard to bring back because that has been the policy for many years within the Brussels government, we told them actually you could make a new, more contemporary image of 8 tributaries for 19 municipalities, because Brussels doesn't have a central government, it's 19 municipalities. So we thought these 8 tributaries would be a much more contemporary and adapted scheme for the city. And we told them you could develop each of these tributaries to enforce the resilience of the landscape by augmenting the rainwater that you can store, and effectively solving the problem of floodings. These are the floodings within the last 5 years in Brussels, and in a certain sense creating a number of linear park systems that makes the city more resilient. We made a study called Brussels 2040, and we were lucky to be able to apply it to a very concrete project where a developer who owns about 50 hectares next to the center of Brussels asked us to make a park of 10 hectares. This is the site of Tour and Taxis. Here you see the canal that I just showed you. The Zenne lies somewhere here underneath the development next to the North Station. If we go back in time, we see that this site was used by trains to deliver goods that then were distributed to the city. This is important to know, so you understand that this is a gully that's been cut into the west bank of the valley, and all the site had been perfectly leveled, so trains could easily dock there. It represents a beautiful urban void within the city of a kind of a démesuré, kind of scale that you don't find anywhere else. And so from the beginning, talking to the developers, we told them, let's try to keep as much as possible this openness. Let's try to make almost reveal the valley of the Zenne, and since we were lying right next to a tributary, expand the system of tributaries all the way to the canal, which you can see here because of the plane trees that border it. And so starting from the industrial heritage, we made a scheme with paths that in a way mimic the logic of the railroad tracks, and a vegetation that runs through the gully all the way to the canal itself, making one big park along which new development could happen. It is the biggest park of the last 150 years, in a way renewing what Leopold II had done in the 1880s. And these are a number of those, or two pictures of those parks that were made in the 19th century, where you can see two features, the kind of glowing landscape and the water bodies. And we thought, let's at least do as good as our colleagues in the 19th century, except that we were faced with two problems. We had no money, and the terrain was totally flat because of the ballast, about 80 centimeters of ballast where they had put the railroad tracks in. I had 20 euros a square meter, since it was the first phase of the development, so we decided that we would not discharge any materials, nor bring any materials on site. We would do with what we found. And so we decided to remodel the site to have rainwater flowing to the lowest point, capturing the rainwater right there, and then using nature to make the park. We didn't have the money to buy trees that would cost 500 euros a piece, so basically we made a park using willows, pioneer trees, for about 5 euros a piece. You plant them, they're 50 centimeters high, they grow about 2 meters a year above, but also in the ground. And it's basically those pioneer trees that prepare the ground for slower growing trees that 10 years from now will take over the image. So it's really a work, very collaborative work with botanists, with ecologists, with podologists, to see how can we bring all this knowledge and with a minimal investment have a kind of park that would produce itself. We call it an evolutive park. And then we found along the way we didn't know what to do with all this ballast, all these stones that were no good for plantation. So suddenly we thought maybe we can use them to make underground reservoirs. So we decided to dug up these areas, put all the stones in there, use what we dug up to make our grading, and we found out that we could store 1 million liters of water, not necessary for the park, but very useful for the future development. So we spoke to the developer, we told him, if you make this now, it costs a bit more, but you save so much money for not making underground cisterns in the future. So there we found a bit more money in this kind of idea of making a park that's performative, a park that helps build this development. And so here you see the scraping off. We rented this machine that would filter the ballast in 3 types of granulate, one for the paths, one for the underground reservoir, and one for the topsoil. So here you see the first reservoir, second reservoir. You see the glowing of the terrain, the first trees. We also planted clover that's much stronger than grass, and over time grass takes over the clover. And here you see these willow trees preparing the terrain for the smaller trees. So it's a park that's in evolution. The coming 10 years, this building was built, it's a Flemish government was built last year. Over the coming 10 years, new buildings will be built, but the park, since we invested before the development, will be a perfect public park in 10 years. A second project in Albania. We won the competition for the Himara waterfront, which is a beach town lying not far from Corfu on the opposite side of Lecce in Italy. It's a beach town that was quite popular with the Albanians, but as you can see from this Google Earth map, plenty of cars parked here, kind of a strange connection with the waterfront. They had built this retaining wall, put a road on top of it, and then parking. And then you can see if you wanted to go to the beach, you had to use these awkward staircases that once in a while would connect with this 2-meter high wall. Everything in function of the car. Then this kind of strange trees and planters. So really not very attractive. And in a very simple gesture, we said the problem is that you don't see the water and there's no accessibility. So it's very simple. You just need to break down the retaining wall. We spoke to maritime engineers who told us that this was a much more efficient way to break the waves. Of course, you don't break it with one wall, but you break it gradually. And the moment we were above the possible water level, we planted new trees to create a continuity, to create shade, and to create a new facade looking from the sea towards the city. And so we proposed this platform, 300 meters long, and working with these maritime engineers defined these lines based on the impact of the waves. This was the image for the competition, and this is the plantation. And so in a very simple way almost, the beach is prolonged all the way to the facade. We used the sand of the beach to make the concrete. And we planted these big pine trees that we imported from Italy. And that created a kind of continuous facade, helping to absorb the less controlled buildings behind it. From everywhere you see the ocean and you're invited to go there. And this project, as the mayor told me, has radically changed the status of a city that has become now one of the most popular beach towns in Albania. And I like this picture a lot because it's basically one section that drove the whole process. So Albania, this idea of a landscape that helps to recreate a relationship between the ocean and the waterfront. And here we go to London, one of our smallest projects. It's a sunken courtyard, 4 by 8 meters, so it's about 1/3 of this room. And it's right in the center of London, Westminster City, and the client told me that he did not like the stone courtyard and wanted a lush garden. A lush garden, but surrounded on 3 sides by really tall facades. On one side by a communal wall with a neighbor. So we thought, how can we get plants growing there? And during the renovation of the facades, I was thinking there's some kind of weird microclimate happening. And I asked the construction company to take temperature within the courtyard and outside on the street. And you could see there would be a 3 to 4 degrees difference throughout the year. Because of course the building is protected from the wind, and there's quite some heat loss from the windows surrounding it, since it's a protected building, protected by English heritage. So we thought, let's take the risk that it would never freeze. Of course, in landscape, freezing or not freezing is a whole different set of plans that you can use. And so we decided to do a more thorough study of the climate, and we found out that it's quite close to the undergrowth of a subtropical forest. In a subtropical forest, the highest trees would create a shade, and the undergrowth would grow in a nearly constant temperature in the shade. The temperature here is also quite constant, a bit less than in the subtropics, but it's also in the shade. And so we decided to plant these massive ferns, tree ferns. We decided to bring some hardscape, but we didn't want to put any tiles, but actually we looked at the sidewalks that were made with York stone. So we went to the quarry that originally provided the sidewalks in Westminster City, chose some leftovers, some rocks. Then we hired the largest mobile crane of the UK, and we craned in over the house these 2-ton stones. I told the guy doing this, like, if you drop this thing, you drop it on my head, and you write my name in it, and we don't speak about it. He was like, yeah. Then we craned in the trees flying over London. And we made this courtyard as if it was the last piece of London untouched, as if the house had been built around it. The client had this brilliant idea to put a Franz West sculpture in it that contrasts perfectly with this kind of prehistoric feel of the ferns. During the climate study, the only thing that was lacking, we found out, was humidity. It was funny that in London it was not humid enough, so we put these humidifiers, and every hour there's 1 minute of mist. Since there's no wind, the mist stays there, and you almost feel like you're in a National Geographic documentary when you enter the garden. So this is before, when we were asked to design the garden, and this is after. From London, I go to Arles in the south of France, where we're making one of our most ambitious projects. It's a project for a new center of arts. It's not a museum, it's really the production and exposition of arts made by the Luma Foundation, led by Maya Hoffman. She assigned Frank Gehry to make a new building right here, Annabel Zeldorf to make the renovation of the existing warehouses, and we're in charge of making a 6-hectare park around these new facilities. Arles lies along the Rhone. It was a second city during the Roman Empire. There's still a theater and an amphitheater. And this side was, again, just like in Brussels, a site for the repair of trains, totally horizontal, cut out in the bedrock, totally flattened out, and in this case, no ballast, but really concrete poured on it, so no vegetation at all. And doing this reading, as we like to do them, we see the side, we see the Rhone, and we see, actually we mapped all the existing trees, and we found out there's a kind of loop of trees that circles the side and connects it back to the city. So we thought, let's open the side where the loop touches it, and let's then invent a new landscape on this side. A new landscape because on the side itself, today there's a kind of climate conditions of a desert. It's all concrete. For those who have seen the Rencontre, which is the yearly festival of photography, it is so hot that it's even hard to walk from this building to that building under 40 degrees in the southern sun in Arles. And so we were asking ourselves, how do you make a new landscape? Because as you've seen, we like to do a reading and see what was there and see how can we reinforce what's there. Here, nothing was there because this site had been cut out of the rocks. So there was no going back in time. So we thought maybe we can have a look about the big landscape surrounding Arles, because Arles is lying next to the Rhone before it pours into the Mediterranean. And we found out there's three main landscape geomorphologies. There's the Gros, which is the ancient floodbed of a glacier, full of stones with no trees. There's the Camargue, which is the estuary plain of the Rhone. And then there's the Alpi, which is the southern branch of the Alps. And we thought it's really interesting that this Roman city is surrounded by three very different regions, both in flora and in fauna. And the birds coming from Africa would migrate to the Gros, but would not stop here. The falcons that love the Alpes would never go there. So there was really this kind of a very rich biodiversity organized around the site. So we thought, can we not learn from those these three types, see how plants grow within the cracks in the limestone in the Alpi, learn from the trees that can still grow in the Gros, even if the wind is really harsh. This is a tamarisk. Or learn from the Camargue, which with its very wet landscape produces a different type of plants. And so we thought, let's see how on this platform where trains used to be repaired, we can make a park for the production of arts, reconnect it to the city with this loop of trees, and then come up with a scheme for this park itself. And the scheme is based on a future archaeology. We thought, if we cannot go back in time, let's go further in time. What would nature do? What would nature do 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 1,000 years from now? How would it reconquer this concrete platform? That was the main question, and we talked to people specialized in wind, people specialized in soil, people specialized in different types of plants. And we thought, most probably, hope you can see this, most probably the wind would deposit materials on which plants could grow. We came up with a scheme because we had a very big problem, was that all this area we're not allowed to dig because we're on top of an archaeology site. So since we cannot dig, the only way to plant anything is to go up higher. There was also the constraints of fire access and canalization. So we thought if we start designing around these constraints, it'll be very strange. Let's forget about the constraints. Let's focus on this narrative of wind producing topography, topography producing different depth of soil, different depth of soil producing different types of vegetation. And so in the end, we decided to make a pond, all the material that we take out here on this line where we're allowed to do it, we used to make this little mounds. And depending on the height of the mounds, we put in different types of vegetation. So in a certain sense, we do a compression of those three landscapes on the site itself. So this is the limit between the archaeology zone and the zone where we're allowed to dig. Modelized by the wind, we create these asymmetrical mounds, where in summer you can sit on a soft slope in the shade, while in the winter you're protected from the wind on the other side of these dunes. And so based on proximity of water and depth, different types of trees are planted. And so in the end, it's one of our most complex plantation schemes, where we're not trying to make a composition, but we're really trying to produce an independent landscape. Independency depends also on water. We're lucky to have a canal, an agricultural canal, flowing next to the site, and we made an agreement with the association of this canal that we can pump water into our lake that is then used as a buffer zone to irrigate all the plants. This is an image on top of the mound looking over the body of water towards the building of Frank Gehry. And here you can see the kind of images that we're making. It's not a formal park, but it's really a piece of nature that is both used by animals and humans. And so here you see an overview from the Rhone to the amphitheater, the building of Gehry, the industrial warehouses, and then the park that sits or nestles itself within it. And as a kind of an ambition, we told ourselves, of course, the foundation will calculate how many people will come and how and tendency will raise or not. We thought our ambition is for migratory birds from January to December to use our site as well. And so we work together with bird watchers from the Camargue that are going to count how many birds will come over the years. I will end with a last project, a research art project in Portugal, in Mukim next to Porto. And here I was asked by Philippe Arenaud, very known French artist, if I would want to collaborate with him on his newest project, being he wanted to make a landscape that only exists in film about a planet lit by two suns. If you follow this discussion at NASA, but they discovered a couple of years ago that for years they had been looking for life on an extraterrestrial planet based on the same scheme as Earth, meaning one planet, one sun. And then, even if it seems obvious now, they thought maybe life can happen on a dwarf planet lit by two suns. And so suddenly there was much more possibilities of life. They call this continuously habitable zones, so where life can continuously develop. In short, CHZ, which has become the name of the movie. And so Philip asked me, let's imagine this planet lit by two suns, and just like land becomes landscape through an artistic or cultural process, can we make this landscape exist in the film? We had 5 sites given to us, and so the idea was to use these 5 sites to create one continuous landscape. And it was quite a tough assignment, because normally I have a client who's quite straightforward, 200 parking spaces, a park, a pond, and this time it was really about thinking the logic of an extraterrestrial planet. And so we did a lot of testing models, especially we had 5 sites, 3 of them in Stuttgart, 2 of them in Porto. And in the end we decided it's not the plan that works, it's the section. And the section works because the film also works with cuts. And so it was a whole different spatial approach that we applied, saying that, okay, maybe it's a kind of archetype landscape of a valley with a plateau, a slope, a wetter area, and a kind of cultivated terraces sloping back up. And so we did a kind of we looked for the how we could combine the 5 sites to create this perfect valley, and we're very happy that finally we found a solution. Until the production team came on site and they said, okay, we cannot film in 5 locations, you're going to choose one, and that's what it'll be. So we chose the biggest one, and we reenacted the other sites on that side. So we kept the logic. We looked for the slope that we found in Stuttgart, in Porto, and we kept the logic of our 5 sites. And then we in preparing the site, we tried to reveal a kind of existing landscape that was hidden by a reality. So we burned down surface burn. We needed an agreement from Parliament to do this, which we got, and then the fire man from Porto did this for us. We leveled the terrain, we unearthed the trees, we brought natural stones from a quarry nearby, and we turned the whole side into this strange landscape that then became a movie set, which was also interesting because was a very interesting discussion with Philippe, where normally what I do is produce images that then become a reality on site, while he produces a reality that becomes an image. So it's kind of the inverse logic, and we understood in a very profound way that in a way landscape architecture is about reading a site, understanding it through images, and using those images to transform reality, that then of course again produces a new image. So I'll end with a number of film stills from this movie CHZ, where you see the dry river. We use diamond dust to have it reflect. And so suddenly the reality transformed by our interventions was again transformed through the lens of the camera. Here you see the trees that we uprooted. The play with the two suns. And as a last gesture, we asked a surveyor to map what we had done in a kind of inverse situation. We asked to map what we had done, and we rented a helicopter to see what we had done from above. And it's really interesting that this project works seen from very close by through the camera, or from very far above. On the level of the human being, it doesn't work. It's a kind of anamorphic landscape reacting to a different logic, which is this logic of this other planet. And so in our projects, we try every time to reveal what's there, and especially to imagine a landscape working with what's there, but projecting us into a new reality. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Bas. And now I would like to have all the speakers on stage. So Giles, Jarmo, Rasmus and Bas, have a seat. Now we will have a 20-minute session for discussion that also involves questions from the audience, if you all have been inspired by the speakers. But maybe we start with a short panel. We have seen 4 completely different approaches to architecture. We have Giles, who talked about legacy and sort of a monumental building also. Then we have Rasmus, who had his approach more of the site than the building. Then Bas, who had the approach of natural landscape, and Jarmo, who was approaching architecture more as an activity. So maybe all of our speakers can have one short comment, like a 30-second comment on each other's approaches, and then we turn to the audience for questions.
Should I start? Okay. Commenting you guys, that was the question. I think from my point of view, I need you all, and we all need each other. So it's not a question of black and white, it's not a question of building or not. Or, I mean, first of all, landscape, for me it's a, as you meant, cultivated environment, that it covers the whole, our culture in a way. Buildings, shelters, and the memories from the history. I mean, all they are connected to each other. And I think one of my main points is community, culture and community. That shapes who we are. And maybe my kind of controversial issue that we don't need traditional buildings for that anymore. We need fragments of things in the same way that we could read. You were saying you're reading environment. I would like to see, I'm reading the city, I'm reading the urban thing. And what is there? How could I reveal what is there already without just building new? Maybe that's my kind of conclusion.
Okay. Well, it's always really rewarding being put among such talent and see different way to approach it. But what I felt like taking back from this was maybe put very good into words by Bas at the end, that it's the architect is able to interpret what is there, but has the ability to imagine what it could be. And talking about the balance of values within architecture, I think that could be a very long discussion, but what is so important for all of us is that we are considering this when we try to imagine what it could be and what it will be, because we are in the fortunate position that people take our ideas seriously, and they are constructed and built, but that's a huge responsibility from our side, because they are not going to be removed the next day. So I really feel encouraged by the projects and the ideas we've seen to keep on thinking, imagining before you do.
So I think I'd reinforce that. I think certainly, I mean, I spoke a lot about collaboration, and I think collaboration is terribly important for the work that we do. I think I think it was interesting, you know, looking at the schemes that have been done, working with artists and with film directors. I think it's bringing the kind of the collective process together creates something, you know, I feel much bigger and greater than that can be delivered by an individual. And I think that's true in all of the projects to some extent that we've spoken about today. And I think working with people collectively, as you said, imagining and pushing boundaries, I think is the exciting challenge as we move forward in this digital age where we are all connected, we all understand and have a relationship with each other in some shape or form. And I think that's the challenge that we all face, and I think it's a very exciting challenge.
We all agree. No, I think collaboration and responsibility and innovation are the key words. I mean, in the beginning, I was wondering why the four of us were here, but I understand better now. But maybe I would want to, in my 30 seconds, just say that I think we should not underestimate the task ahead of us. The climate change, the population growth, and it's frustrating that we always have these assignments that are very precise. Of course, a building for this, a landscape for this. Well, of course, we try to imagine a kind of change on a larger level. So I think we should break the code and find a way of making this big shift and not just one by one. But that's, of course, a very big challenge.
So now it's my turn to thank all the panelists. And if there are any questions in the audience about the value of co-creation or many aspects of architecture, now the floor is yours. Just raise a hand for questions.
I would like to ask from Mr. Norman Foster's office that Norman Foster was known for piloting an airplane. And I would like to ask if this sort of affected this project, this Norman Foster's like about planes.
Yes, well, as you probably all know, Norman is a keen pilot. When I joined the office, he was flying gliders, And I think that's well documented, and he kind of moved on as budgets moved on, and he has his own jet, which he still pilots, although in a very limited way, given his age. But certainly, I think as we developed the project, I think his understanding of flight was important. I think he wanted to celebrate. In particular, the film, which I couldn't show all of it, but there is some wonderful imagery of the plane skimming across the surface, actually through the Midwest, which is rather beautiful. And he wanted to kind of capture that sense of flight, and that's why the building is positioned and the plane is positioned in the way that it is, that you kind of get that sense that you are making that journey, particularly when you're behind the building where actually all of the staff sit. So that was kind of, I think that was very important to him as we developed the project.
Anyone else for questions?
I would like to ask from Bas, and particularly this park in Brussels. I find it very interesting that you told that it was not ready. So there was there were the pioneer trees that prepare it for the bigger, slower trees, and that you first planted clover that will give place to grass. Can you tell it how did the audience, the people, react to this? That it's not ready. You make a park and it's not ready. It's in continuous change.
There was a lot of communication done on the park, saying that this was not a park that was ready. It was already open to public, so people could use it before it was closed off. So I think that the smart move by the developers was to make a path that was well maintained, and so suddenly there was a kind of a shortcut for many people. Since they are building around, it's quite clear it's a construction site. So let's say we didn't say it's a park that's not ready. We said it's a construction site that's already open. So which I mean, developers are smart, huh? That's what they develop. So we changed it into a positive message, which it was in a certain sense. And sometimes I feel bad about explaining how with so few money we could do something quite spectacular. I mean, I would have preferred, of course, to have 10 times more money and had it ready from the beginning. So there's a kind of, it's a tricky thing, but what I think was interesting about this project is it's really nature producing it. And I think more and more in our projects we're looking at what would nature do and how can we accelerate what it does instead of trying to fight against it.
Do we have more questions?
Thank you, first of all, to all gentlemen for very inspiring talks today and being with us. I would like to actually ask a comment from each of you, inspired by the remark that Mr. Bas Smets made just now. Sometimes it's said that architecture is as good as the client who orders it, and considering the challenges that we have, and you, Bas Smets, mentioned that it's a pity that very often projects are very scattered or very isolated. And so if you could now describe your dream project, how would that commission be, considering what we are dealing with? How should actually projects be set? Is it the same way that there is a clear client, or how should we create to be able to, in a way, to take architecture to serve in a way as in the future and our challenges?
I think we'll probably all have our own views about that. What would make a dream project? I certainly think, from my experience, I mean, the client, it actually is critically important. And I think if you have a client, an individual or a client body who are genuinely engaged and they want to really explore the architectural, the spatial quality, of a design and a project, I think you're in a very good place. And I think I mean, it's something that Norman has always said, you know, your projects are only as good as the clients who commission them. So I do think that is critically important. And I would certainly, I think we see a lot of private clients come to us, and there's normally a figurehead and there's somebody who can immediately identify. I think on public projects that's more challenging, and I think I think we would certainly like to see real kind of champions for public projects where it's not by committee, but it's by an individual or group of individuals who really have a strong vision. So I think, you know, how can you improve things? I think for public projects, you know, build those teams, those client bodies who really have passion about delivery.
Let me just add on that a dream project would, of course, need the engagement of the client, but I think it's also a matter of maybe trying to start one step before that. I foresee a future where it could be necessary to have designers and architects much more involved in the brief and the programming of the projects. And that, I think, could be really, really interesting when we are allowed to have a voice where we can take up the discussion we heard earlier about whether to use existing structures or rebuild, where all this is part of the project. That makes it really, really interesting. It could be a dream project. And I think that discussion is, when it's done, very often done without the view of design. It's often done for practical reasons, economical reasons. It's not involved that ability to imagine the future. And then we are giving the brief. So I think there's a chance that we really change something if we get the chance to engage in that dialogue a little earlier.
I agree that the client is key. Often in the office I say you cannot be more ambitious than the client. You can a little bit, but it's very difficult. And I think it's important to understand the role of the client, because we speak a lot about the role of the architect or the landscape architect, but the client needs to have the same vision, or needs at least to give you the power to develop that vision, and that's not always the case. So I think client is key, and then there's different types of projects. So for me, I was thinking, but I don't have a dream project, because I enjoyed as much making this little courtyard in London as I did making this very large project in Aalto, for example. So it's more about it's not the assignment, but the relationship. And in some projects, the clients give us the opportunity to really collaborate, to also provide the fees to do that. And that's really important. And I often try to for example, when we work with a developer, I try to tell them that our fees are nothing compared to the final cost. So investing in our fees makes a much better result for only a fraction of the price. So I think that it's really the collaboration that creates the good conditions, and to finish the trouble in public projects, and of course public space is mostly made through a public process, is that there's this disconnection between client, landscape architect, and construction firm, and that's really tough. So I think that to make better public projects, we have to rethink how this triangulation works.
And for me, it's a question: who is the client? Who we consider to be the client? And in these cases, I was showing to you. Especially at the school, the client was Department of Education, not the real estate department in the city, not the professional client that we used to work with. And that was the first time that we were able to actually directly connect it with the Department of Education, because it was not about construction. And that makes huge change. The city of Espoo I'm working with has built recently quite many schools, and each of the schools are outcome of architectural competition. And even if I exaggerate a little bit, they said that none of these schools are pedagogically satisfying. So there are lots of different things that the actual client, the user, are not satisfied with. But that translation mechanism from the user to developer to designer, that somehow it's a black box, 2-3 years black box, and the actual client will receive the keys after 3 years then, okay, here's your school, use it. And I really appreciate your park, which is, it might be ready someday, but it don't have to be. And if I think about network, I think it never be ready. It's kind of constantly evolving organism. And then it's not a question anymore of one client. It's a question of many clients. And the reason I was showing this kind of oversimplified service platform, the reason we don't have that, we don't have the network management system. We usually have one client who wants to own and control. And I want to build this, and I want you to deliver that to me. And I think that creates a lot of challenges to architects, that they are part of the process of delivering something finished. And one of the projects I have been working with is the Think Corner of University of Helsinki. I developed the program, and it was architecture competition. Office JKM won the competition and did the building. But instead of thinking about traditional kind of handling that, here's your building, I create the manual with Helsinki University about I call it taking over manual, or I don't know what is the English name, haltuunotto manual in Finnish. That you don't deliver, you take over it. And we were discussing with the actual client, how do users will take over? How the building could evolve with them? And I think that's a big question to architects. Could we deliver finished products, which I don't believe? I mean, technically it's finished. So it's kind of ongoing process.
Yeah, but I do think, I mean, you know, the end user, of course, is the client, and you could argue a critically important part of the client. I think a good client and an individual group should engage with the end users in a very positive way. And certainly, I think the projects is very interesting. The slide you showed about the Nobel Prize winners in the shed, and we built a project in Stanford, a research centre there. And as part of the briefing design process, we worked directly with the scientists, and we developed, you know, interestingly, completely flexible arrangement of buildings that would allow them to grow, shrink, change equipment very, very quickly. And that came out of, I'd say, the intuition of the main client to understand that engaging with those end users is critically important. But I think when we talk about good clients, it's knowing that you need to engage with them, but the skill is not totally engaging with them, where you end up building something so specific and it's just for them. And that's a real skill that I think is very, very difficult to achieve. And certainly I have been in projects where we have dealt with the end users and we've built something, and those end users are all gone, and people coming in want something different. So it's a really interesting, I think, aspect, the client briefing, getting it right. As I said, I think is critically important to the success of projects.
Let me try to simplify this with the analog or reference to the movie industry. The movie is in principle have 3 phases once you do it. It's a pre-production, you have the narrative, you have the story, you create storyboards, experiences. There is the production. Director actually goes to set and creates the raw material. And then it's the post-production. You go back to the pre-production, you go back to the narrative and work with that and let it change. And what I kind of claim that in architects we have pre-production and production phase. We are lacking of post-production. There's no budget of that, there's no management of that, and that's not, and if I come back to your question, what is the good client? For me, a good client who understands the post-production, that buildings need to evolve, at least certain buildings. That's just one way to look at
Yes, thank you. I think the post-production phase is a good point to end this discussion. Helsinki Design Week will continue the rest of the week, and I think many of us have many more events to attend. But a great thank you for the panel. Maybe we applause once more. And if there are any representatives of media, journalists and others, all of our speakers will be available backstage in one of the negotiation rooms. So please follow us if you would like to interview somebody here today. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much to the Museum of Architecture on behalf of Graphic Concrete. And what I would like to do here, together with my colleague Katja, is to thank you, our wonderful speakers. I do hope we have made something together today. We have had brilliant speakers, and I hope you have had some nice ideas, thoughts for the future, how to combine the history with today, with some new theories, with the landscaping, which I now realize landscaping is actually, it's the virtual reality. You had the small traveler traveling somewhere, and you had the landscape painted there. So with hopefully a lot of new inspiration. Thank you, our brilliant professionals, and have a good evening.
Hello. Hi. From Dubai. We are Graphic Concrete Dubai.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.